just the person I was looking for. How you doing, sir? Deputy Sheriff Canute, Martin County Sheriff's Office. Do you have any weapons or anything in the vehicle?
I have a 9mm in the console.
I need you to be honest with me right now. Have you shot any rounds near that house that you just drove by?
54-year-old Spirit Airlines attendant Cynthia Cindy Scarione Seith was returning home from a late-night flight on July 15th of 2025 when she was shot in the head just steps away from the entrance of her condo in Lake Worth, Florida. While searching the scene, police found a GPS tracker that had been surreptitiously attached to the victim's car, leading to the suspicion that she had been the target of a cold-blooded execution. Detectives soon learned that Cindy had recently emerged from an acrimonious divorce from her ex-husband, 53-year-old Richard Seith, a respected eye doctor who owned clinics in Stewart and Port St. Lucie. Richard had cancelled his subscription for the GPS tracker just hours after his ex-wife's death, securing his place at the top of the suspect list. Richard denied any involvement in the crime, claiming that he hadn't seen Cindy since late 2024, but further investigation turned up evidence indicating that he had stalked Cindy, cut her off financially, and locked her out of their home in the year leading up to the finalization of the former couple's divorce. At the time of Cindy's murder, Richard owed her around $285,000, which only furthered law enforcement's suspicions that he was responsible for her death. 3 days after the discovery of Cindy's body, authorities arrested Richard on a first-degree premeditated murder charge. He's being held without bond at the Palm Beach County Jail, while court records have yet to reveal whether prosecutors plan to pursue the death penalty. Number 26. Darin McFarland. While responding to a report of gunfire on Thursday, August 21st, 2025, police found 29-year-old Marissa Divodai Lesser and her son, second grader Josiah Divodai Lesser, suffering from gunshot wounds inside their Cameron Park, California home. Marissa was pronounced dead at the scene while Josiah succumbed to his injuries after being rushed to the hospital. At the time of their deaths, the victims were living with Marissa's boyfriend, 47-year-old Darin McFarland, who worked as a fire captain for the state's Department of Forestry and Fire Protection in El Dorado County. He was quickly identified as a person of interest in the case and was arrested later that night in neighboring Mono County, while 1,000 of his colleagues worked to battle an ongoing forest fire in the region. McFarland has been charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 count each of attempted murder, child abuse, and domestic violence. According to prosecutors, he killed Marissa and Josiah to prevent them from being able to testify after witnessing a crime. Although a criminal complaint does not elaborate on the nature of what they saw, McFarland remains held without bond at the El Dorado County Jail while awaiting an upcoming status conference, which is scheduled for September 29th. Number 25. Jonathan Lee. In January of 2024, U.S. Army Private Jonathan Kang Lee skipped a scheduled court hearing for assault charges stemming from the abuse of his 2 stepdaughters between June of 2020 and February of 2022. He was convicted in absentia and sentenced to 64 years in prison, but remained on the run for 12 days before being apprehended and transferred back into military custody. During that time, Lee killed 34-year-old taxi driver Nicholas Frank Hokema, who was found dead in the parking lot of a Tukwila, Washington shopping mall. It would later be revealed in court that Lee got into Hokema's taxi after his own vehicle broke down. After stabbing Hokema to death during an argument over his fear, Lee stole the victim's vehicle, leaving him behind to die on the pavement. Investigators with the Army's Criminal Investigation Division tracked the fugitive to his girlfriend's apartment in Redmond, Washington, where he attempted to flee by jumping out a second-story window. He continued to resist and even tried to grab an agent's gun while being subdued and taken into custody. Following his capture, Lee was charged with murder, resisting arrest, desertion, wrongful use of a controlled substance, and failure to obey a lawful order. He pleaded guilty as charged in April of 2025 and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 20 years. He was also dishonorably discharged and ordered to forfeit all pay and allowances. Number 24. Ernest Ferguson.
What's up, man?
Everything good?
Yeah, everything's good.
Yeah, I'm about to go to the house.
Okay, sweet.
Get my weapon license.
Your weapons license? Where's it at? Where's it at? Hey, tried to stop him. He pulled his gun saying, "You're going to have to kill me." And then he started running away, but he was still putting the gun up towards us, so.
In an ongoing legal saga that began more than 3 years ago, a former Savannah police officer is facing criminal charges for the death of 31-year-old Saudi Lee, who was shot 4 times in the back while fleeing from law enforcement in late June of 2022. The accused killer, ex-cop Ernest Ferguson, claimed that he had acted in self-defense when he pulled the trigger, but questions quickly arose regarding the department's questionable vetting procedures after investigative journalists discovered multiple prior disciplinary actions during his previous job as a corrections officer at a state prison, leading many to wonder why Ferguson had been hired as a police officer in the first place. Following his arrest, Ferguson pleaded not guilty to 8 charges including felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and making a false statement. He's currently being held without bond at the Chatham County Jail as he awaits his next court hearing, which is scheduled for November 21st. Number 23. Andrew Steele. On August 22nd of 2014, 911 dispatchers in Dane County, Wisconsin, received a harrowing call from a woman who said that her brother-in-law had shot her in the back. Officers arrived at the residence in Fitchburg to find the caller, 38-year-old Casey Tollefsball, clinging to life on the basement floor. She pleaded for help and was rushed to the emergency room where she died from her injuries. Inside the master bedroom, police found Tollefsball's sister, 39-year-old Ashley Steele, dead with a gunshot wound to the head and a zip tie around her neck. Also present at the scene was Ashley's husband, 39-year-old former sheriff's deputy Andrew Steele, who was found lying next to a 9mm pistol inside a laundry room. He had lit a charcoal stove in an apparent attempt to fill the room with carbon monoxide, but was pulled from the scene uninjured and charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Steele had left his position with the Dane County Sheriff's Office just months earlier after receiving a terminal ALS diagnosis. During that time, Ashley had worked tirelessly to raise money for her husband's treatment, unaware that he may have had more sinister plans. Following his arrest, Steele claimed that he had accidentally killed Ashley during a consensual BDSM session gone wrong. In court, his defense attorneys blamed ALS for his actions, claiming that the disease had caused cognitive deficiencies which inhibited his ability to think clearly. Prosecutors argued that Steele had acted in a premeditated and deliberate fashion, citing detailed notes of the murder plans that were found in his phone, along with evidence that he had gone out of his way to ensure that he and the victims were the only people in the home on the day of the killings. Steele ultimately pleaded guilty to the double homicide but was found not criminally responsible in April of 2015 due to mental illness supposedly stemming from his ALS diagnosis. He spent nearly 2 years in an institution before passing away from ALS-related complications in March of 2017. Number 22. Paris Wilson. During the early morning hours of February 21st, 2025, 38-year-old personal trainer Danny Cahalane answered the door at his Plymouth, England home and was ambushed by a group of assailants who threw sulfuric acid in his face while his young daughter slept upstairs. He was rushed to the emergency room at around 4 a.m. and spent nearly 3 months fighting for his life in the hospital before succumbing to his injuries. Investigators traced the crime to Cahalane's ex-girlfriend, 38-year-old probation officer and prison volunteer Paris Wilson, who spent her spare time teaching inmates how to read and write. Out of the 9 suspects who have been charged in connection with the case, Wilson and 5 others face a murder charge. She's also among 7 defendants who are charged with conspiracy to murder and conspiracy to kidnap, while several suspects are also facing drug-related charges. Authorities say that the suspects are part of an organized group who plotted to kidnap and kill Cahalane, but have not revealed a suspected motive for the crime. The defendants have pleaded not guilty and Wilson remains held without bond as she awaits her next court hearing. Number 21. Matthew Plote. 27-year-old emergency medical technician Melissa Lameche was just days away from giving birth to a son when she was found unresponsive on the kitchen floor of her Mount Morris, Illinois home. Neither she nor her unborn child survived, and an autopsy found that Lameche had been strangled to death before the fire was set. Police quickly turned their attention toward her casual on and off boyfriend, volunteer firefighter Matthew Plote, who admitted to being at the victim's home on the day of her death but claimed Lameche was alive when he left. Investigators remained suspicious but didn't have enough to charge Plote, so they continued gathering evidence. for the next year and a half until finally, in March of 2022, they decided to move forward with the case. Plote was charged with multiple crimes including murder, the intentional homicide of an unborn child, and arson. During his trial in March of 2024, prosecutors accused him of killing Lameche because he didn't want to be a father. The defense painted an entirely different picture, claiming that Plote planned to be an active parent who financially supported Lameche and their child, but the jury ultimately found him guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of the intentional homicide of an unborn child, 1 count of residential arson, and 1 count of aggravated domestic battery. In June of 2024, Lameche was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, plus 60 years for his crimes. 2 months later, a judge denied his request to reconsider his punishment, meaning he'll spend the remainder of his days behind bars. Number 20. Andrew Lyons. 24-year-old father of 3, Ryan Twyman's life was cut short in June of 2019 when he was fatally shot by a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy while attempting to flee from law enforcement in his vehicle. At the time, he was wanted in connection with the shooting and for having guns despite being banned from possessing firearms due to his status as a felon. Efforts to find Twyman over a 2-month period had proved fruitless until the day of the shooting, when detectives received a tip that he had been seen at a Los Angeles apartment complex. Authorities went to the address and attempted to apprehend Twyman, who ignored commands to turn off his vehicle and show his hands. He put the car in reverse and began backing out of his parking spot, prompting 2 deputies to open fire on the vehicle. The car came to a stop, but one of the deputies, Andrew Lyons, retrieved a semi-automatic assault rifle and continued shooting. Twyman died at the scene from bullet wounds to the neck and upper body, and Lyons was fired from his job after it was determined that his use of force was out of line with the department's policies. In March of 2022, he was charged with voluntary manslaughter and 2 counts of assault with a weapon. The case languished in the court system for nearly 2 years before Lyons pleaded no contest in January of 2024 to 2 felony charges of assault with a semi-automatic firearm and assault under the color of authority. Prosecutors dropped the voluntary manslaughter charge as part of a plea agreement, and he was sentenced to 30 days in jail and banned for life from possessing a firearm. Following the sentencing hearing, Lyons' defense attorney said that his client begrudgingly agreed to the plea deal because he felt it was in his family's best interests, and accused the prosecution of revolving the case around politics rather than facts. A vastly different viewpoint was expressed by Twyman's father, who stated during the hearing that Lyons had hunted down and assassinated his son. Number 19. Edwin Brainerd. On July 1st of 2024, sheriff's deputies responded to a late-night call about a shooting at an Anderson, South Carolina home. They arrived at the residence to find 79-year-old Edwin Brainerd Jr., a former psychology professor, standing over his wife, 74-year-old Sally Brainerd. Edwin, who had been listed as a professor emeritus at Clemson University several years earlier, admitted to shooting Sally with a 12-gauge shotgun during a verbal altercation. He was arrested on suspicion of murder and possession of a weapon during a violent crime, and apologized profusely at a subsequent bond hearing, stating that he loved Sally and never intended for the shooting to happen. Roughly a month after his arrest, Brainerd posted a $50,000 bond and was released from jail on house arrest and GPS monitoring. The judge also ordered him to undergo a mental evaluation, but any opportunities to intervene were apparently missed, and he passed away from an overdose 4 months later, in December of 2024. Several weeks later, local news outlets confirmed through court records that the case against Brainerd had been dismissed due to his death. Number 18. The murder of Edward Daquan Smith. While responding to a late-night report of gunfire at a house party in El Paso, Texas, on February 28th of 2024, police officers found U.S. Army soldier Edward Daquan Smith unresponsive on the sidewalk with multiple gunshot wounds. The 23-year-old victim died from his injuries, and several witnesses, including the suspect's own stepson, implicated the accused shooter in the crime. According to bystanders, 24-year-old Eric Lamar Mathis and another man known only as Slimy immediately confronted Smith with a gun in hand as he arrived at the party and exited his car. Smith reportedly seemed confused by the aggression but this didn't stop the assailants from shooting him 8 times. Witnesses described seeing Slimy standing over the victim and continuing to fire rounds even after Smith had collapsed onto the ground. Both suspects were seen shooting, and shell casings found at the scene showed that 3 different caliber weapons were discharged during the incident. In the meantime, Mathis showed up at a local emergency room with a bullet wound to the arm. After being treated for the injury, he was questioned at police headquarters and denied any involvement in the crime. Roughly a month after the shooting, he was arrested in connection with the case. During a court hearing in April, Mathis claimed that he had acted in self-defense when Smith was shot. 2 months later, in early June, authorities announced the arrest of the second suspect, 21-year-old Howard Shavard Dyron Brock, who was also a soldier stationed at Fort Bliss. Both defendants were charged with murder, and the cases against them appear to be ongoing. Number 17. Jason Meade. In December of 2020, Sheriff's Deputy Jason Meade thought he saw a driver waving a gun at him as they drove past one another in Franklin County. He followed the young man, who was later identified as 23-year-old Casey Goodson Jr., and shot him 6 times as he entered his grandmother's home, killing him at the scene. 5 of the 6 shots struck Goodson from behind, causing investigators to question Meade's claim that Goodson had turned toward him with a gun and that he feared for his life. At the time, Franklin County Sheriff's deputies did not wear body cameras, so the incident wasn't captured on video. Goodson's family did not dispute that he may have been armed, as he had a concealed carry permit, but they insisted that he was holding a sandwich bag in one hand and his house keys in the other when he was shot. The victim's gun was found in the home's kitchen with the safety on, casting further doubt on Meade's version of events. Following an investigation, prosecutors charged Meade with murder and reckless homicide. The former sheriff's deputy maintained his innocence, with his defense attorneys arguing during his trial in early 2024 that the evidence was consistent with his claim that Goodson had threatened him with a gun. But Meade was the only person who testified that Goodson was holding a gun, and the jury was unable to reach a consensus, resulting in a mistrial. A second trial was originally scheduled for February of 2025, but the date has been pushed back to December of this year. Number 16. Richard Sigman. 18-year-old Anna Jones was preparing to enter her freshman year at the University of West Georgia when she was shot dead near a Carrollton pizzeria on July 30th of 2022. The young woman was sitting in a car with her friends when the gunman approached the vehicle, knocked on the passenger side window, and fired 3 gunshots as the driver tried frantically to reverse out of the parking lot. Responding officers spoke with the shooter, 47-year-old Richard Sigman, who is a professor at the college where Jones was soon due to start attending classes. Sigman claimed that he had returned fire in self-defense after someone else had shot at him, but investigators determined that he had opened fire on the car in a completely unprovoked fashion and that he was never in any danger. Police also concluded that Sigman was extremely drunk at the time of the shooting and that he had just threatened to shoot a man at the nearby pizzeria during a seemingly unrelated argument. He had been kicked out of the business by security before walking roughly a block and shooting Jones. The shooter and victim were strangers, causing the authorities to scratch their heads as they tried to establish a motive for the seemingly random crime. In October of 2023, Sigman pleaded guilty to malice murder, 3 counts of aggravated assault and 3 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony as part of a plea deal, which came with life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He will be 77 years old when he becomes eligible to regain his freedom in 2052, and Anna's family said they'll be ready with a letter to the parole board urging them not to release him. Number 15. Leah Scott. A Florida middle school teacher with no criminal history is facing a possible lifetime behind bars for killing her elderly father, who was gunned down outside a West Palm Beach home. 75-year-old Leroy Scott was working as a handyman in August of 2025 when his daughter, 43-year-old Leah Scott, arrived at the same residence to visit her aunt and uncle. Leah confronted Leroy in the driveway, leading to a verbal altercation between the two. Prosecutors say that Leroy was attempting to walk away from the dispute when Leah pulled a gun and shot him in the back. She proceeded to shoot her father 3 more times after he collapsed onto the ground, then fled the scene but was taken into custody after police spotted her walking nearby. Leroy was pronounced dead at the scene, and Leah reportedly confessed to shooting him while being questioned by law enforcement. The incident was captured on surveillance video, and Leah was booked into custody on charges of first-degree, premeditated homicide, and exhibiting a weapon on or near school property. She remains held without bond and is currently banned from her workplace but has not been fired from her job. and her defense attorney emphasized the complex father-daughter relationship, which he says could help to explain the context of the incident. Number 14. Curtis Lovelace. Former Illinois prosecutor Curtis Lovelace had just dropped his children off at school on Valentine's Day in 2006 when he arrived at the family's Quincy home to find his wife, 38-year-old Corey Lovelace, dead in bed. At the time, the couple were experiencing a troubled marriage plagued by alcohol abuse. An autopsy found that Corey had died from complications stemming from fatty liver disease, but not everyone believed that this was the case, and in 2012, prosecutors charged Curtis with first-degree murder and accused him of fatally strangling his wife. Lovelace steadfastly maintained his innocence but spent several years in pre-trial detention before a judge lowered his bond to an amount that he could afford. His first trial ended in a mistrial after the jury became hopelessly deadlocked, and his fight to clear his name finally paid off when a jury found him not guilty following his second trial in 2017. After walking away a free man, Lovelace sued Adams County and the city of Quincy for wrongfully accusing him of murder. The 16-year legal saga reached a long-awaited end in 2022 when the court overseeing the lawsuit ruled in his favor and awarded him a $4.5 million settlement for his suffering. Number 13. Stephen Geer. 33-year-old police officer Evan Dunn was working a traffic accident along Highway 58 in Golden in November of 2024 when an intoxicated driver barreled into the scene, striking him and 3 others. Dunn died at the scene and Officer Bethany Grusin survived after being rushed to the hospital with serious injuries. 2 civilians were also injured in the collision. The alleged drunk driver, 43-year-old Colorado School of Mines professor Stephen Geer, was charged with vehicular homicide, 3rd-degree assault, driving under the influence, and 2 counts of vehicular assault. He pleaded not guilty during a court hearing in August of this year and remains free after posting a $250,000 bond shortly after his arrest. Geer, who has no prior criminal history, is reportedly considering a plea agreement that has been offered by the prosecution as he awaits a preliminary hearing. If the parties have not reached a tentative agreement by that time, the case is expected to be bound over for trial. Number 12. Sarah Stein. During the summer of 2016, prosecutors in Washtenaw County, Michigan, accused 37-year-old juvenile probation officer Sarah Stein of lying about the gang-related shooting death of 20-year-old Keandre Duff, who had been killed at a house party in Ypsilanti the previous year. According to authorities, a juvenile parolee admitted to shooting Duff during a meeting with Stein, who withheld the information from her superiors for more than a year. She only admitted what she knew after evidence was presented in the case, and investigators suspected that she had destroyed evidence and put witnesses in danger by identifying them to other parolees. Stein was initially charged with 4 counts of lying to a peace officer during the investigation of a violent crime. She was placed on administrative leave for the next 2 years before quitting her job in late 2018 and pleading guilty to felony and misdemeanor charges of lying to a peace officer. In February of 2019, Stein was sentenced to 1.5 years of probation. She apologized for her actions during the hearing, stating that she was embarrassed and ashamed of her behavior. Number 11. Craig Patterson. 44-year-old Arlington County Sheriff's Deputy Craig Patterson was off duty when he encountered a heavily intoxicated man in Alexandria during the early morning hours in May of 2013. The confrontation led to an argument over who had a right to be in the neighborhood, where Patterson was a relative newcomer, and a witness would later tell police that they overheard Patterson telling the man that he'd be back. He then went home and retrieved his gun before returning to the scene and fatally shooting his adversary, who was later identified as 22-year-old Julian Dawkins. Patterson called 911 and claimed that Dawkins had come at him with a knife, but prosecutors accused Patterson of killing Dawkins in a rage because he felt disrespected, pointing out in court that the victim's knife was found folded in his back pocket. The state also argued that if Dawkins was truly a threat, Patterson should have called 911 and let law enforcement handle the situation. In late 2013, a jury found Patterson guilty of voluntary manslaughter. The judge imposed the recommended 6-year sentence, but the outcome was not without controversy, as evidenced by the dozen-plus sheriff's deputies who turned up in court to support their former colleague. Number 10. Dontie Mitchell. Also known by the name Enfalme Sikivu, Dontie Mitchell went to prison as a teenager and served more than 20 years before being granted clemency by then New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo in 2021. Acting on the belief that a lack of adult guidance played a role in the circumstances that led to his incarceration, he developed a program to help at-risk youths and became a self-proclaimed anti-violence advocate following his release. But Mitchell apparently did not practice what he preached, as evidenced by his arrest in August of 2023 for the death of Shair Leggett, who was shot to death in the small city of Cohoes. According to prosecutors, Leggett was killed by a stray bullet during an exchange of gunfire between Mitchell and another man named Nalik Seeley, the latter of whom is serving a 5 to 15-year prison sentence for his role in the shootout. Mitchell was acquitted of attempted murder but found guilty of a weapon charge earlier this year and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He maintained his innocence during his sentencing hearing, but continues to face legal problems following his indictment in February on 20 assault-related charges for predatory behavior in an unrelated case. Number 9. Anthony Lizama Morcia. During the spring of 2013, 46-year-old Superior Court probation officer Anthony Lizama Morcia exited his workplace in Guam and found the lifeless body of his toddler daughter in her car seat. He had forgotten she was in the vehicle after picking her up more than 7 hours earlier, leaving her at the mercy of scorching hot temperatures, which left her covered in second-degree burns. The child was pronounced dead at the hospital, and Morcia was charged with murder, negligent homicide, leaving a child in a motor vehicle, and child abuse. He pleaded not guilty and was allowed to return to his job under the condition that he did not discuss the ongoing case. In a controversial turn of events, Morcia was acquitted of all charges following his trial in June of 2014. His supporters could be heard clapping in the courtroom gallery amid an equal amount of audible gasps from those who were shocked by the ruling. In a statement following the verdict, Attorney General Leonardo Rapadas said that there were no winners in the case, that justice had not fallen on deaf ears, and that the law applies equally to good and bad people. Number 8. Brindell Wilkins. In a case that made news headlines in North Carolina and beyond over a several-year period, Granville County Sheriff Brindell Wilkins fell under widespread criticism in August of 2014 over allegations that he had encouraged the murder of a sheriff's deputy who had surreptitiously recorded him making racist statements and was threatening to leak the tape. According to court documents, Wilkins had stated that killing Deputy Joshua Freeman would be the only way to stop him from releasing the incriminating recording to the public. He also allegedly brainstormed possible ways to get away with Freeman's murder. Evidence of the conversation was turned over to state investigators, and Wilkins was indicted on 2 counts of felony obstruction of justice in 2019. Following a 10-month investigation, in an unrelated case, he was later charged with fraud and additional obstruction counts for falsifying firearms training records for himself and certain deputies. Wilkins pleaded guilty to the charges stemming from the alleged racist recording and was sentenced to 18 months in prison. He was also found guilty in the unrelated case, but his conviction for those charges was overturned in 2024 after an appeals court ruled that the allegations against him didn't meet the criteria for the crimes. Number 7. Adolfo Corona. A former California Superior Court judge is facing state and federal charges for allegedly assaulting 2 court employees and attempting to cover up the crimes. In September of 2024, 66-year-old Adolfo Corona was indicted by a state grand jury on charges of forcible penetration and battery. Nearly a year later, a federal grand jury indicted him on 5 counts, including assault, making false statements, and obstructing the investigation into his alleged actions. According to prosecutors, Adolfo assaulted the first victim, a 33-year-old woman, in a courthouse stairwell, then lied about his conduct during an FBI interview. Authorities are also accusing Adolfo of assaulting a 43-year-old female employee who was found passed out in his chambers. He allegedly attempted to cover his tracks by trying to convince a motorcycle shop owner to create a false record stating that he was at the business at the time of the assault. If convicted as charged, Adolfo could face 8 years in state prison, while the federal charges carry maximum sentences of 40 years for the assault charge and 20 years each for 2 counts of obstruction. Number 6. Robert Ferrante. Doctors Autumn Klein and Robert Ferrante seemed to have an idyllic marriage, but that vision was turned on its head in April of 2013 when 41-year-old Klein died following a mysterious medical episode at her Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania home. She spent 3 agonizing days fighting for her life in the hospital before she passed away, and an autopsy found that she had succumbed to cyanide poisoning. Further investigation revealed that just days before his wife's death, Ferrante had ordered a large amount of cyanide despite having no legitimate reason for doing so. He was accused of murdering Klein by putting the poison in a creatine drink mix that he knew she would use after becoming convinced that the victim was having an affair with a colleague. Ferrante maintained his innocence, arguing that Klein had chosen to ingest the cyanide on her own, but his story failed to hold up in court, and in late 2014 he was found guilty of first-degree murder, resulting in an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. He appealed his case, but his petition for a new trial was denied, and records show that the now 76-year-old remains incarcerated at the state's Houtsdale Correctional Facility. Number 5. James Durward Winstead. While responding to a reported shooting on April 9th of 2025, sheriff's deputies in Yazoo County, Mississippi found 45-year-old Michael Byrd dead from a gunshot wound. Present at the scene was Yazoo City Police Chief James Durward Winstead, who initially gave a story indicating that no foul play was involved. Investigators quickly noticed discrepancies in his version of events, leading to his arrest 2 days later on a capital murder charge. 50-year-old Winstead had resigned from his position in 2021 after less than 2 years with the department and decades of working in law enforcement. While authorities have released few details regarding the circumstances that led to Byrd's death, the judge overseeing the case determined that there was enough evidence to detain Winstead without bond as the matter plays out in court. He remains in custody as he awaits his next hearing, and the case has been bound over for trial. Number 4. Polish priest goes wayward. A Polish priest made international news headlines in July of 2025 after authorities say he murdered a 68-year-old homeless man in Radom district, known only as Miroslaw M. Due to Polish privacy laws, the suspect is accused of beating the victim, Anatol Chiz, to death with an axe, dousing his body with an accelerant, and then setting his remains on fire. According to prosecutors, the two men were riding in a car together when a disagreement broke out over Miroslaw's alleged promise to provide Anatol with lifelong assistance and care. The dispute reportedly escalated into physical violence when they began discussing the victim's future housing arrangement. A bicyclist found Anatol engulfed in flames after watching Miroslaw drive away from the scene, but any attempts to save the victim ultimately proved futile. An autopsy revealed burns to 80% of Anatol's body, along with sharp force injuries to his head. Miroslaw is currently in custody on a murder charge which could carry a prison sentence of up to 15 years. In the meantime, the Archbishop of Warsaw has asked the Vatican to defrock the suspect while condemning the brutally violent act that led to his arrest. Number 3. Michael Justin Mims. In October of 2021, former Berkeley County, South Carolina prosecutor Michael Justin Mims was arrested in connection with multiple alleged violent acts against his 3 children, including trying to choke one of his kids to death at the family's Hanahan home. During another incident, he allegedly slapped his daughter repeatedly before throwing her into a chair. Mims was also accused of leaving a gun within reach of his children, resulting in charges of attempted murder and neglect. The allegations came to light after Mims's estranged wife presented evidence of the abuse to a divorce attorney, who decided to take further action. Following his arrest, Mims was fired from his position as a special DUI prosecutor. In January of 2023, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of unlawful conduct towards a child and received a 10-year sentence with 8 years suspended and credit for time served while on house arrest. He was released the following day and is currently serving a 3-year probation term. Today's topic was requested by Summer Leon 1291. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Patrick Seith Green. In early June of 2025, St. Landry Parish Sheriff's deputies responded to a home in Opelousas, where they found a child with brain cancer suffering from multiple apparent stab wounds. The victim was airlifted to the hospital where they underwent emergency surgery for injuries to the face, neck and chest. Present at the scene was the child's stepfather, 37-year-old special education teacher Patrick Seith Green, who was reportedly combative with deputies while being taken into custody for his alleged role in the attack. 7 children were at the home when the attack occurred, and additional abuse allegations have since come to light, including accusations that Green had previously threatened family members with a gun. Green was initially booked into custody on suspicion of domestic abuse, battery with child endangerment, 2 counts of aggravated assault and resisting an officer. He's currently on administrative leave from his job and is being held without bond on 8 additional counts of attempted first-degree murder. Number 1. Franco Reverberi. An Italian priest who fled Argentina in 2011 is fighting his extradition to the country to face justice for crimes he's accused of committing during the country's military dictatorship between 1976 and 1983. 87-year-old Franco Reverberi is sought on multiple charges, including the 1976 murder of 22-year-old Jose Guillermo Beron and the torture of several other men while serving as military chaplain in the town of San Rafael. He left Argentina after the country began holding trials against those who were accused of committing crimes against humanity while under authoritarian rule, resulting in the disappearance and deaths of an estimated 30,000 victims. In August of 2023, Italy's justice minister approved Reverberi's extradition to Argentina, but the priest challenged the ruling, further stalling the decades-old case. It was later revealed that the justice minister was unaware that Reverberi had filed an appeal, resulting in the reversal of the decision and Italy's subsequent refusal to extradite the priest. Reverberi maintains his innocence and remains in good standing with the Vatican as the case remains at an apparent standstill. Thanks for watching. Who do you think is the worst role model among today's public figures and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below.